Okay, so in the last class I had gone through what was meant by the term copyright, and copyright is protection that applies to creative works, and we saw there were some conditions for getting that. One of the main things about copyright was that it lasted for 70 years after the author's death in most jurisdictions. And we saw that there are challenges to the enforcement of copyright because of the ease with which things can be copied using modern machines and the ease with which they can be so rapidly distributed. We also discussed the concept in US copyright law of fair use, and the idea that if you're commenting or discussing or critiquing other people's work, it may be necessary for you to copy small portions of it. And if you're in the education business, like I am, it may be necessary for you to copy things from time to time in order to adequately discuss them. I think, though, there is another issue that we come across in modern culture that copyright hasn't really adapted to yet, even though it's had about 50 or 60 years to do that now. And that's the idea of creating new works from old. So when artists like Turner went out into the countryside to paint, their inspiration came, from the leaves and the trees and the forest and the people and, the scenery, the landscape. However, in the post-war period, where you've modern artists interacting with the environment around them, to some extent the landscape also includes the media landscape and the popular culture landscape. So I'm sure you've all seen Andy Warhol's Campbell soup tins and paintings and screen prints he made from things he saw in the media. This one here, I just have it open on Wikipedia because I want to get the name just right, is by Richard Hamilton. And this is called Just What It Is That Makes Today's Homes So Different, So Appealing. And actually, no. If the man does sue me, it'll not because I've used this in class, but because I've chopped the top off and ruined his picture. There's more of it than that. Let me just see if I can. Is there more there? No, the one I had was very tightly cropped. Okay, that's unfortunate because there's there's slightly more to it than that. Anyway, from one heresy to another. Okay, so clearly this is made up with bits of things from magazines and stuff. So this collage has things cut out from magazines, and for this artist the landscape was the media landscape around him. Now in the 1950s, magazines would have played a much more important role than they do now. But I guess somebody somewhere took a picture of this man, and the owner of the copyright of that image, the photographer, might quite reasonably be annoyed that this artist took some of his work and used it, presumably without his permission. However, most people would probably accept that this collage here is a new work, that it's a creative endeavor that has its source material in the work of others, but that it's reasonable because he's made a new work out of that. That somehow if it was, just this guy on his own with nothing else, well then that would be, wholesale theft. And so I think while fair use might possibly protect people, in some respects, this guy's work was a critique of modern life, and you could argue that it was he's critiquing the consumerism of the 1950s, and so in that criticism he has some protection from fair use. But even that's a bit of a stretch, I think. What he's done is he's made something new. He's made a new creative work out of stuff that was already existing in the culture. And if he did end up in court, I guess his argument would have been that this is a new work of art that just happens to use stuff from other people. And most people would be quite happy to accept that what he did was quite reasonable and that he should not be sued. So what we're going to do at the end of class is we're going to listen to some music, and we see if the same kinds of arguments can hold, and we see if some people have pushed the boat out too far or not. But the one or two issues in copyright we want to sort out first. Until very recently, copyright was the only mechanism by which software developers were able to get paid from their work. So copyright is the primary mechanism by which software generates income. So you write a program and you make a game or an application and you put it in shops, perhaps on discs or on cartridges or on DVDs or something, and people pay to buy those and you get some money. It may be very easy for them to copy those things. We all know it's very easy to copy software. And if there wasn't copyright protection to stop people copying the software, then there might be very, very few people working in the software industry. Because it's the main way people get paid in software. So whatever about teenagers in their bedrooms not having any respect for copyright, as people who might be working in the software industry, it could be your bread and butter. So you don't want people stealing your work and copying it, because then you might not get paid. You could see how with an app as well, you might develop a small app. You might make some small game. I mean, there was a time when to make money from games, you had to, have a huge, huge budget and produce a blockbuster. But I mean, you can, knock together something, a little app for an iPad or an iPhone, and, might not be spectacular, but people might pay, €2 or €3 for it if it was any good. If people didn't pay the €2 or €3, I mean, if there was no copyright, you might not get any money. I mean, they used to talk about some countries as being a one-copy country for software, where there'd be like one legitimate copy of the software in that country, and then everything else would be a copy. Lately, the business model is changing somewhat, in that a lot of software now is being sold as a service. So it's not something you buy and something you own. It's something you subscribe to on the web, perhaps, typically on the web. And so you log in, you pay an annual fee, and then you can use that service for the year. It may be that that is the way things would have gone naturally, or it may be that that's a response to copyright enforcement difficulties, that people need to go that way to make money. It's interesting that music is kind of going that way too a little bit. So the model where you walk into a record shop, like there's only one left now really, and buy a CD, and then people get their money that way, that's kind of changing. Apple has reproduced that online, where you go and you buy a song on the online store, and then you have it, and it's yours. But even that model is changing. I mean, I gave an iPod Shuffle to someone as a present about 2 years ago, and that person was kind of only just finished college now, and I was asking her recently how she got on. She said, "Oh, it worked all right, and I was able to charge it up, but I couldn't change the music on it. I needed that iTunes thing, you know." And I was saying, "But how could you not have iTunes on your machine?" And for her, she's probably about the same age as yourselves, the idea that music was something that you possessed, you know, something that you owned and had, didn't make much sense at all. You know, if you want to listen to something, you just go to YouTube or whatever and listen to it. Music is something you catch on the network as it's flying past. It's not something you own. So if there are many more people like her, and I'm sure there are, the way I think of music is becoming increasingly outmoded approach to having music. And I guess the way that people would have made money from me as a business model is going away too. So you can see that even music is moving towards a sort of software as a service kind of approach. So things like Spotify, where you pay or don't pay even, and you just listen to whatever you want. And you pay as you, if you are paying, you pay per month or per year. It seems that Apple may go that way too. So copyright was the primary mechanism for making money from software that may be fading away slowly, we shall see. It's still the main way people make money from games. I mean, well, of course, not the only way. I mean, if you take World of Warcraft or something, that's a service you're paying for. It's not that you go away and buy the disc and then you're done. Or if you could copy the disc somehow, then you'd have two. And you could buy one disc, make 10 copies, and then your friends you'd all have one. It doesn't work like that. It's a service that you're logging into and paying for as you go.
In-game purchases and stuff, so you can buy stuff.
Yeah, that's another business model where you sort of give it away for free and then get people to buy more.
That's the way go, because you make game Newell instead of that's the future. That's where the big money is in-game purchases.
Could be. I mean, if you take something like Farmville, God help us.
Well,
I mean, we poo-poo but I mean, they're laughing all the way to the bank. They're rolling in money.
I don't know, their stock price isn't particularly anymore.
Still, maybe they're not going to make much more money. That's maybe what's affecting their stock price, but it's not like they haven't made buckets and buckets and buckets and buckets of it. You know, and of course copyright means they don't care, you know. It's not like you can, clone a cow. They have complete control there. So, like I said, copyright used to be the only way for software developers to get paid. But things are moving away from, well, not moving away, but certainly there are now less copyright dependent ways to make money. And it could be that that's a natural evolution, or maybe just the enforcement issues were so troublesome that people moved away. Just as artists, musicians have started maybe to move away from the copyright only model and make money from concerts and other things. No. There is a movement, I suppose is the best word for it, called open source. And that's where people give their time for free to projects that they consider worthwhile. And they work on those projects, and then the output of those projects are free, given away free in the public domain. The two most famous examples would be the Linux operating system, where sort of mostly one person initially worked on that, and then he collaborated with others, and we have the Linux operating system that we have now, and that's an open source thing, and people keep that going by giving their time for free. Some companies encourage their employees to maybe give a day a week to something like that. And then the other example is OpenOffice, which is a free alternative to Microsoft Office. And that's very popular. We do, when talking about open source, trot out the same two mega examples every time.
Android, no, as well as another major example.
Well, that's true. That's true, in fairness. Android is another example. But it's not at all clear, to be honest, if that is the way to get things done. you wonder how much spare time people have and how good something can really be. Now, in fairness, Linux, Android, and OpenOffice are all superb products. It's not at all clear if it scales down, if there's something less sexy can you do with open source. But the idea behind open source is that the code is public. People can do what they want with it. They can take it away, modify it, do what they want. So the rights that would normally be held by copyright owners are waived. And so it's just like sitting there sort of in the pool, and you can take it away and do what you want with it. Now, very often, like, just because you can download something for free doesn't mean it's open source. So you have to check very carefully the licensing. But some open source is like totally free. Others require, for example, that the stuff you produce must be given away on the same terms, which might not suit you. You know, you might take something that's open source, but you might need to make some money from that. And it might not be open to you to give it away for free when you have your finished product. Most of the people making money around open source are doing so because they're supporting it. So if you buy something from Microsoft or from Apple and you have a problem with it, you can call them up and they might help you. If you have a problem with OpenOffice, well, you know, who are you going to call? So there are people who make it their business for you to call them. So some people will help you with your setup. They'll help you configure your Linux stuff, or they'll help you, you know, with your support for your Microsoft Office, things like that. So open source is a very important movement, but it does remain to be seen whether it can only work for the huge, mega, sexy projects. And of course, I mean, Google had a lot to do with getting Android off the ground. And as we know, Google is also rolling in money. I mean, it had, you know, the 40 of us in this room decided some time ago that we thought the world needed an open source operating system for phones. It's clear that there was a need, and it's clear that that was a good idea. It's not at all clear that we could have pulled that off without Google's bags of money. So, I mean, we'll see. The guy from Finland didn't make much money from that, you know, but he got some fame.
Do you know Google does? They employ some people and allow them to spend 50% of their time working on projects.
Yeah,
50%
yeah.
of the time working for them.
Yeah.
I think the guy who developed Python programming language, he's on the that kind of setup where he spends.
Yeah.
50%
In Google, you're required or expected to spend something like 10% of your time, I think, on your non-core job. So like something you think is cool and interesting. You know, I think Python probably is much older than Google, but so people do that. So some of the things that we see in Google may have started as pet projects that someone had.
It's pretty much an Android startup. It's just like a small group of people, developers, and they came across it and saw it was a potential, and they bought it. Started by another small company. I can't remember the guy's name.
Well, I mean, it's come from the Unix, the free Linux stuff, the free Unix stuff. It has its origins there. So open source is interesting, and one of the problems the open source movement has is that the corporate world doesn't trust it. When in actual fact, it's often much cheaper and in many cases superior and more robust than some of the commercial things you can buy. And so, I mean, a huge number of the web's machines, routers and things, are all running on open source. And lots of web servers run on open source as well. And they're fairly sturdy. And obviously, if there's a security problem, many people are going to be very interested in fixing that. So the open source and the internet were a very good match because it allowed the internet to expand fairly rapidly and fairly cheaply. Okay, so any questions on any of that?
Now, I use Ubuntu on my computer, and I have no problem with viruses or attacks.
Yeah.
It's really good, much better than I have. Windows I have problems with. But
Yeah.
Ubuntu is fantastic.
But part of that is if you have some operating system that, only 1% of the population has, the hack, the spammers, and you're not worth their while. They go for the low-hanging fruit. If you can hack Windows, and then you've got 99% of the machines in the world, to wreak havoc on, that's more profitable. So it may be that Ubuntu is more secure, or it may be that you're just not worth someone's while.
Yeah.
I always worry about that with my Mac, because the number of Mac users is increasing to the point where it might actually be worth someone's while to go after them. I saw a very interesting statistic. Someone was giving a lecture, and they were talking about a security problem that had happened with a Danish bank, I think. And when they were listing, the percentage of people that had gotten caught, and so 80% of the people that had gotten caught were Internet Explorer users, and maybe 10% were Firefox, and the other 10% from the others. And I actually thought it was a little bit unfair, though. It may not have been because of the browsers. I would say of the 80% of the people that had Internet Explorer that had gotten caught, I would nearly bet money that they didn't even know they had a browser, or they didn't know what a browser was, let alone that it should be updated. When Microsoft brought out it went from to Windows 95 years ago, in 1995 obviously. One of the biggest problems they had was explaining to people that you have an operating system and you should upgrade it. Do you know what I mean? So your Firefox users, if they're the kind of people who have gone to the trouble of deciding they don't want Internet Explorer, going to Firefox and downloading it, are probably the same kind of people who are going to update their antivirus software, who are going to update their browsers. So it may not have been the fault of the browser, do you know what I mean? It may have just been that in the population of people that use Internet Explorer, it was not the same kind of people that would be using Firefox. But I digress. Now I just want to talk about the public domain, because it's a term that is used differently in copyright from the way it's used in day-to-day conversation. So if, say, in politics there's a secret that isn't quite out yet, and then someone might say, well, we can talk about that now because it's in the public domain. So it may have been up to last week that some people knew the Pope was going to retire, but couldn't talk about it until today because now it's in the public domain or something. So often in conversation, when we say something is in the public domain, we mean it's known. It's a known fact. It's public knowledge. In copyright, when we talk about the public domain, we're talking about work that no longer has any intellectual property rights associated with it. The most common way things enter the public domain is that the author's dead 70 years and the time's up. So William Shakespeare is long dead, so the stuff he wrote is no longer has any copyright protection because he's dead way more than 70 years. James Joyce only recently had his 70th anniversary. So until very recently his stuff had copyright protection, but now it's in the public domain. So until very recently people could do nothing with it because his estate was quite strict about what you could do. And now, we could have the Glee version of Ulysses or something, which is scary on so many levels. But you could do what you like with with Joyce's work now. There may also be mechanisms by which the intellectual property never applied in the first place. So, for example, if something was declared open source at the very, very beginning, or if you publish something, you could say, you know, I'm giving up my copyright entitlements here. I'm just giving it away. You know, that could happen.
You can put restrictions on that, like that people who use it can't use it to make.
You can. It's your work. You can specify precisely what you want. There is a scheme called Creative Commons, where you can say to people, you can use my work, but under these conditions, and there's a set of standard licenses. So obviously you can say copyright, you know, all rights reserved. This is my photograph, for example, say on Flickr. You can't do anything with it. Alternative, you can say, look, you can use this if you want, provided it's not for commercial use. So, for example, if I needed a picture of something, I could use that in class. Or you can have totally, you know, do what you want with this, I don't care. There's a range there, and you can sort of pick from a range on that, you know, a point on that scale. That's Creative Commons. That's worth looking into as well. So some people, for example, are quite happy to publish their photos and let people do whatever they want with them, provided it's not for commercial use. So if I have a photograph, or I don't know, let's say this class here that I'm giving now, let's say some bunch of librarians in Minnesota or something wants to use it to give a talk on copyright. I might have set it up with the settings on this. I could say, yeah, you can do that, provided it's not for commercial use, whatever. If IBM wanted to sell it, you know, I'd probably say, well, give some money. So you can set up what you want. So that's called Creative Commons, and that was really that goes back to this here, this collage here. And people are saying, well, look, if I have a picture like this man here, and you want to do something like make a collage with it, you know, that's fine. Go ahead. I won't sue you. It comes from that kind of approach. So the next class we're going to start looking at patents. But for your blog for week 3, apart from summarizing what we did in class, I want you to, and I'll give you some examples here, to find a song that uses samples by someone else, and then imagine that the sampled artist is suing the artist that included it, and let's say you're a juror in the case. What would your decision be? What do you think is reasonable, and what do you think is not? So in the few minutes that we have left there, we'll listen to a few examples. There is a man called Girl Talk who hasn't gotten sued. And some people think the reason he hasn't gotten sued is that he's doing precisely this. He's making a collage from things that are out there in the culture. And some people think that if the record companies actually went to court, then they would lose and it would be open season. So they're better off leaving things the way they are. Whereas if you sample a piece of someone's work, you have to pay very often quite a bit. I actually think Girl Talk, I think he goes too far actually. I think he's not creating a collage to the same extent as Hamilton did. But other people would disagree. What I want you to do is I want you to find an example and make a judgment call whether, like, you know, I'm the juror, right? You know, sue the bollocks, you know, give me $1 million. Or look, do you know, that's perfectly reasonable. It's 2013. That's how music is made in 2013. What you did was a reasonable thing. Maybe it was a small amount, whatever. Okay? But we listen to some examples now as well in the time that we've left. Interestingly, they won't be on the recording because, of course, I could get the arse sued off me for doing that.